We're just waiting to admit a few more people. We are waiting for one of our speakers, but we'll go ahead momentarily.
Hola a todos, bienvenidos. Estamos esperando por uno de nuestros presentadores, pero vamos a empezar en unos momentos.
Susan, you're on mute.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Susan Nadell. I'm E2's Mountain West advocate. We are so pleased you have joined this panel conversation today. The program is about Colorado's transition to pollution-free energy and what this means for buildings, homes, and jobs. But before we continue on, I would like to introduce Andrea, who is going to be doing a simultaneous translation into Spanish, and she will give us some instructions. So Andrea, would you go ahead?
Thank you, Susan. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrea, and I'm here with the Community Language Cooperative because the hosts of this meeting have committed to language justice. This means people will be able to hear and speak in the language of their heart. To do that, we're going to offer simultaneous interpretation in English and Spanish. In a couple of seconds, we are going to turn on the interpretation feature, and you're going to see at the bottom of your screen a world map. Or if you're on your phone or a tablet, you're going to see 3 dots or what it says more, and you're going to see the Spanish or English option. If you have any questions, you can ask it in the chat. And I do ask for the presenters or anybody that's going to be speaking during the Q&A that you stretch your words, that you remember to speak close to your microphone very clearly. And if that you are going to use acronyms, that for the first time before you say that acronym, you say what it is fully. I'm going to do a double check after we start interpretation to ensure that everybody can hear me, and then we can begin. Hola a todos, mi nombre es Andrea, estoy aquí con la Community Language Cooperative para ayudarnos a crear un espacio de justicia del lenguaje donde podamos hablar y escuchar el idioma de nuestro corazón. Para eso vamos a tener interpretación simultánea en inglés y en español, y en algunos segundos vamos a aprender la interpretación y tú vas a poder ver un mapa mundo en la parte inferior de tu pantalla, o si estás en tu teléfono o tableta donde dice More o los 3 punticos para escoger tu idioma. Si tienes alguna pregunta, puedes hacerla en el chat. Thank you, and we can begin interpretation now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So
the interpretation needs to be started. The
okay.
host needs to start the interpretation.
Okay, yeah, so people can choose it on their bottom panel?
Yes, but I need to be assigned as the interpreter, and I am not the interpreter yet.
Vanessa, do you see that?
I am trying to see if I can really quick. Hold on. Jenny, if you're still on, do you have the capability?
I'm sorry, can you repeat what it is that we need? Sorry.
The interpreter capability to assign to Andrea.
The host is the only person that can assign the interpreter.
Okay.
And at the bottom of your screen, you should see the world map that says language or manage languages.
Okay, I'm going to, I don't see that at the bottom of my screen, but I will work through this with Jenny. Susan, if you want to continue, and I'll work through this with Jenny on the side.
Okay, great. Thank you. And sorry, this is the first time we've done this as a group, so we're still working out the wrinkles. But before I continue on, I would like to point out that this event is co-hosted by the Sierra Club, Good Business Colorado, and E2. And for those of you who don't know about E2 or environmental entrepreneurs, we are a national nonpartisan group of business leaders, investors, and others who advocate for smart policies that are good for the economy and good for the environment. Vanessa and Angelique, would you like to introduce yourselves and welcome your members? Maybe start with Vanessa. I think you're not on mute, so.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Vanessa Cordova. I'm with the Colorado Sierra Club, and I really appreciate you joining us today.
Angelique.
Hi, I'm Angelique Espinoza. I am the Policy Director for Good Business Colorado, and we are a membership organization of over 370 small businesses who believe in the triple bottom line. So we advocate for a prosperous economy and also an equitable community, and of course, a sustainable environment. And we're so happy to welcome not only our GBC members today, but everyone else who's on the call. Welcome.
Thank you, Vanessa and Angelique. I will now turn to that we have now our expert speakers on the call today. Now, it's hard with everybody can control their video stream, so I would suggest that folks turn off their video and just allow the speakers to be on video so you can see them. So our first speaker is Jacqueline Cochran. She is the manager of NREL's Grid Systems Group. Jacqueline analyzes best practices to integrate renewable and distributed energy resources to the electric grid. She recently co-led a renewable energy grid integration study of India and is currently leading the City of Los Angeles's 100% renewable energy study. Our second speaker is Edwin Zoe, who is the founder and owner of Zoe Mama, an Asian street food restaurant that has delighted the hearts of food lovers in Denver and Boulder for over 10 years. Edwin's restaurants have always used induction burners. He made this decision when working to establish a safe and healthy environment in his first restaurant for his mother. And the third speaker is Kahn Frank, who is the owner of SMC Geothermal. He is an inventive, self-taught designer and builder who needed to prove it could all be done. He utilizes the available site footprint to create the highest and best system-wide efficient HVAC, which is heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and cooling system, and hot water systems. Kahn has been designing and installing all electric geothermal systems for over 40 years. We'll hear from each of our speakers and then move to Q&A. We want to hear from the audience and make this format as conversational as possible. You can submit a question through the Zoom Q&A feature, and I will do my best to work it into the queue. Now on to our program. Jacqueline, would you please take it away?
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everyone, for welcoming me and for all of you attending. We just completed our study with the City of LA, and I will share a link later so that you know how to find it. But we worked with the city to figure out how they could achieve 100% renewable power grid while electrifying end uses like stoves and vehicles to achieve deep decarbonization in the city. And what was, there were a number of things especially interesting about the city. One was trying to figure out how we could get 100% renewable system that's reliable. So how can you keep the lights on even when you have extreme weather events like we saw in Texas, or like we could see, you know, as the climate is changing going forward? How can we have it renewable and reliable? And another really interesting part of the study is that we looked at this clean energy question from a holistic perspective. So we looked at what are the jobs associated with the clean energy transition, what are the economic impacts, what are the benefits to the environment and health, how can communities help shape changes to prioritize environmental justice, and many other questions. We approach this from the perspective of the community. So listening to the community concerns, how can we help address that? Also, as part of this study, we modeled every building in Los Angeles to understand how changes in homes and businesses, for example, due to energy efficiency upgrades or induction stoves or vehicle charging, how these could affect the demand for electricity, which in turn affects how we would supply this demand with renewable sources of energy. And Vanessa, could you please show the image? So Vanessa's pulling up an image that we're using that shows the city of LA. Actually, if you could back up, yeah. So here we're zooming into the city of Los Angeles, and we're going down to each premise, each building within the city, and these little columns represent demand for electricity. And this particular, with the light color, white purple, represents the cooling loads. So this is the demand for electricity within the city that comes from air conditioners and heat pumps, which are more efficient than air conditioners. And we can look at, and now we're looking at all loads, all sources of demand for electricity. And what this type of data helps allow us to do is look at, well, what is the role of efficient technologies in reducing these columns? What is the role of cooling and shifting the cooling demand of electricity from to different times of the day when the renewable energy sources are greater? And we do this for each end use, like for vehicle charging. How can we ensure that vehicles are charging during the day? How can we incentivize vehicles to be charged during the day when the solar generation is at its peak? So that's just the type of data that's in our models, because we looked at this from a very detailed perspective, but again, also trying to look at it broadly to capture all these different benefits. And what you have learned, I believe, in some of the past sessions that this group has had is that, and this is consistent with what you have learned, which is that electrification in the buildings and in vehicles is a big source of environmental benefits to cities. So that's what can help reduce asthma and so forth. And then finally, I just wanted to say a little bit more about the jobs. We did evaluate what jobs are associated with expenditures related to operating the electricity grid and building new renewable capacity. And we see an average of around 10,000 jobs a year. And for context, LA is almost the same size power grid as Excel is in Colorado. So it would be a similar amount here, potentially. But I will leave it at that and pass the baton to the other guests.
Thank you, Jacqueline. That's fascinating to understand how big the LA area is compared to Excel's territory too, and that we could look at some of the similar results from what you found. Our next speaker is Edwin Zoe. Would you like to take the floor, so to speak, Edwin?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Edwin Zoe, founder of Zoe Mama. Yes, it all started over 10 years ago after my father passed away, and my mom was having a really hard time with the loss. So I asked her to move to Boulder, closer to me. After she agreed, I realized that I needed a project for her, because if she didn't have a project, then I would very well become her project. So I came up with the idea of Zoe Mama restaurant, where she can, make her really delicious home style and street food. And one of the first things I consider is that I wanted a comfortable environment for her. And I remember reading that in Europe, this is about 15 years ago, reading that in Europe and Asia, induction burners were very popular because they were safe and comfortable. Even though it was costly back then, it was not a key factor since it was for my mom. Now, in terms of key factors to consider in terms of adopting induction burners, I think one of the first things people talk about is efficiency. And by way of comparison, we can look at the three main platforms out there. First is gas, which most restaurant chefs are familiar and restaurateurs are familiar with. Now, in terms of efficiency, when we talk about efficiency, we're talking about what amount of energy in the fuel is actually going to go towards actual cooking the food. And in the case of gas, you'll read efficiency levels anywhere from like high 20s to in the 40s. That means the energy that's stored in there, only about 30 to 40% actually go towards cooking. And so the obvious question is, well, where does the rest go? And anyone who has been in a kitchen before knows that it gets hot, and that heat comes from the gas heating the air around it. And then, so it is not very efficient when it comes to the actual cooking of the food. Rather, you heat up the environment, and then in turn you have to cool the space down. So it magnifies its inefficiency. Now, the second platform that a lot of people are familiar with is electric conduction, which are the electric coils that quite often you'll see in home appliances or hot plates. And those have efficiency somewhere between 50 and 70%, depending on where you read those sources. Again, that means most substantial amount of heat actually go towards anything but actually cooking the food itself. And then the last one is induction, electric induction. Induction is highly efficient. It depending on the source, and the efficiency level is anywhere from 80 to 90%. So that means almost all the energy that is used actually goes towards cooking the food. And then the other part of that is because so little of it is wasted, then very little of it is actually heating the surface area around it. And one of the benefits to that is that if you actually touch the surface of a induction range, quite often the areas immediately around the actual cooking area is actually quite cool to the touch. So that brings us to the second part, which is the safety issue. Is that compared to gas, it is substantially safer to work with induction, and because of the heating issue, also there's no flames. So it's I have not heard of any incident of induction causing a flare up or flame up that causes fires. And then second part is that because there is no flame, there is no carbon monoxide, and so that's another safety concern both in commercial environments as well as in home environments. And then the last one is, which periodically I hear these, read these terrible stories about how gas leaks cause an explosion and has damaged property and injured people. And again, with induction, that's not an issue. And then the next part is in terms of comfort, which because so much energy is directed only towards cooking, the environment around you is actually quite cool. And so it's much easier to work in that environment. And of course, as a chef, and also a lot of home chefs, one of the biggest complaints they have about electric over gas is the performance. And that's one thing that the induction clearly is just as good, if not better, in terms of its responsiveness. It is very fast. It responds almost instantaneously. So when you turn it up, quite often, people notice, wow, this thing cooks up really fast. But also when you turn it down, the heat goes away instantaneously. And the next part is cleaning. In terms of cleaning, because unlike gas burners, which has a lot of crevices that both at home as well as in the restaurant environment, we have to pull out the grates and scrape off all the crumbs and all the stuff that builds up in the crevices. With a clean ceramic glass top, we basically just wipe it down. And so if you have spills, etc., again, you don't have to worry about flame outs or just making a huge mess. You just wipe off the ceramic surface. And the last part to consider, which has traditionally been one of the biggest barriers, in addition to the lack of knowledge about induction, is the cost. 10 years ago, it is typically about $1,000 per burner, which in the restaurant environment, that's extremely expensive. And even home environments, quite often you can, get a 4-burner cooktop for, probably $1,000. And here we're talking about is one burner and costing $1,000. But the price has come down substantially. And depending on the type of use that you have, there are burners that you can purchase for less than $200. So induction is definitely far superior, especially in light of the fact that as we have more renewable energy coming online and bringing the cost of the electricity down, then it becomes much more cost competitive just on price alone, not to mention all the other benefits. Okay, so go induction.
Thank you, Edwin. That's a good review. I agree. I switched to induction and it's amazing. It seems like the gas is like the slow road now. It's not fast at all. Our next and final speaker is Kahn Frank. Kahn, can you unmute yourself and start your video?
My name is Kahn Frank. I have been in the energy efficiency business since the early 80s. We just completed a little project that I developed a cul-de-sac, and we used induction stoves in our houses, and it worked out very well. We don't have the combustion to deal with. We don't have the combustion air to deal with. So our loads are calculated totally different for our houses. We put geothermal into the development. I went to Excel to get the engineering done for the gas line. By the time we'd have done the traffic control, we'd have cut the street, installed the gas line, and run the laterals to each and every house. We pretty much had the same exact costs as what we have drilling our holes for geothermal. We built very tight houses, and so our loads were very small. We had 2-ton geothermal heat pump for a house that was 1,900 square foot, as an example. It was 1,984 square feet actually. And so we are all electric in these houses. We have a few solar panels on the roof, and we're net zero. So we have gone with the heat pump dryers, heat pump water heaters, HRVs. We have the best indoor air quality that you can possibly almost get, short of bubble house. I've worked with doctors from National Jewish, and our air is testing out to be so clean that it is almost close to that bubble house air quality. Since we use the HRVs to evacuate all areas of the house where pollution happens, if you're cooking with your new induction stove, even though you don't have that gas fume that's going out, you still have cooking fumes. We have vents that pull that fume right out of the air and deposit it outside while it's exchanging the heat with the incoming air from outside. If it's like today, when it's 50 degrees out, you can't pull 50-degree air in because it starts taking your comfort level down. And so the HRVs are about 90% efficient in this temperature, 80 at least. So for you pulling the heat off the ceiling at 75 degrees, exchanging with 50-degree air, you only have to heat that air a couple of degrees. So when we did our subdivision, we put the geothermal systems in, and we did not install gas. XL Energy gave us geothermal heat energy credits for installing geothermal. If we had installed gas in the subdivision, we would have not been able to get the energy credits. And so at that point in time, our geothermal costs less than actual gas line installation and putting in the best gas furnace you can put in and the best air conditioner. And we still have better efficiencies with the geothermal system. We did a bunch of units in the apartment buildings already. I designed a geothermal system for apartment buildings. We've got 540 plus units of geothermal apartments. The rents were able to be elevated 6 times in the first year because people just wanted to move in to the new geothermal apartments in Brighton because the utilities were so incredibly cheap, inexpensive. We monitored a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment with 2 people living in there full time, and we averaged $9.82 a month for 16 months. So that's what our average is on heating, and 1,040 square foot, 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment. It's incredible. If you just address your envelope a little, and those were not built very tight. They were built to Energy Star at best, and we went in with our geothermal system. We have no strip heat, so we don't have any spikes or peaks in our loads. We use about the same amount of energy in the summertime as we do in the wintertime, which makes it excellent for the power companies. We had a lot of incentives from the power company, from the local REA, and from the distribution network that stepped in behind these projects because they know that we level their peaks for them the year round. So that's pretty much what I've been doing. And we've been doing the net zero energy way before net zero energy was ever coined net zero energy. That's pretty much my story.
Thank you so much, Kahn. And I did put in the chat that HRV means a heat recovery ventilation system for the translation. Hopefully that will help. Well, thank you, everybody. We went from the macro to the micro. If the speakers would like to turn on their videos, I think I'd like to go now to the Q&A. And while folks put questions in the chat, I have a couple that I would like to ask our speakers. Jacqueline, what can we learn from the LA 100 study that is applicable to Colorado? And there was a question, it's sort of a follow-on to that. What are the important differences between LA and Excel's Colorado territory in terms of getting to 100% renewables? That was from Paul in our audience.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot actually more similar than different between LA and Colorado. In terms of differences, probably the key difference is the climate here. So you're going to have more demand for electricity because of all these heat pumps in the winter, and probably a lighter air conditioning load in the summer. But no matter what, whichever direction, like the West in general is located close to a lot of good renewables. We have great wind and solar. And to get towards 100%, no matter where, there's going to be a lot of new wind, solar, and batteries to help manage that day-to-day fluctuation in electricity supply and demand. And that gets you most of the way there, but not all of the way. And what we need at the end is something that we can turn on that's renewable and run for several days. And that's where we're not looking for something that just shifts around the time, or it's not just managing a few hours. We're managing these multiple days of something more extreme. So in LA, that happens, let's say in November, like where you have a really poor week of wind and solar, and your batteries are just not cutting it, right? Every day you're losing a little power in your batteries because they're not recharging. And it would be something similar here in Colorado. Here too, we would need something that could last several days. And current technologies include like a hydrogen fueled generator. And in the future, maybe we have something more sophisticated, but we at least have something that we can confidently pursue these goals.
Great, thank you. The next question is for Edwin and perhaps Kahn, what is the infrastructure required for induction? And is there anything you feel that induction is not suited for?
Great question. Excellent question. Let's see, in terms of infrastructure, it is to think of essentially same as the same requirement as electric conduction. So if you already have say a 240 50 amp, there are induction tops that you can get that will use that up. But something to keep in mind is that because it's so much more efficient, it's almost, if you use the same electrical requirements, you're going to get basically a Ferrari or Lamborghini. The thing is, going to cook so fast, so quickly that it may not be worth the additional cost. In that a mid-range induction will easily outperform any high-end gas as well as electric conduction stove or burner. And quite often you'll see in apartments or small apartments that people will just use a 110 volt hot plate, and that will actually provide the same performance as most electric conduction or a small gas stove. So the requirements are very modest, and that should not be a consideration when switching over to induction. In terms of if there's anything that induction is not suitable for, and that's a more complex question because there's many aspects to that. First and foremost is that if you have a heavy investment in really nice aluminum pots and pans, those will not work because induction technology works on a magnetic field, so it has to be what we call ferrous metal. And ferrous metal means that anything that will attract a magnet. And in fact, one of the tricks I did when I go to stores to look for pots and pans, I'll just carry a tiny little magnet. I'll stick to the bottom of it. If it sticks, then I know it's going to work on an induction stove. And then if you have investment in, say, the cast iron, those will work really great on it because iron is very, very magnetic and very ferrous. And then something else is that for commercial applications, if you have really large form factor cooking requirements, like if you have a giant stock pot that you need to do, there are induction burners for that, but the cost can be extremely high. And so in that situation, and also goes to the other part, is that if you're doing really long cooking, for example, like overnight stocks and things like that, then a electric conduction may be more appropriate because the sweet spot for induction is the really quick acceleration of heat, transfer energy into the cooking. But if you have a really long process, then that advantage goes away, and that's where electric conduction can kind of catch up on the tail end of that. And also, electric conduction on a large form factor is far less expensive than the induction, which can cost tens or $20,000 for a large form factor. And then probably the last thing I would say is that if you're one of those home chefs or professional chefs like to see a lot of flames as you're tossing, and sauteing, when we see the sizzle going up and down, all that, you're not going to get that induction. So you have to be ready with a little lighter on the side when you're tossing it in order to get those flames going. So those are the considerations.
Thanks, Edwin. I like that. Stand in for that. Interesting. So Kahn's moving away from cooking, getting back to some of the equipment that you use in your buildings, net zero buildings. Could you explain how heat pump hot water heaters work? And are they as efficient as gas heaters or traditional electric hot water heaters? This is just to heat the water in your home or your building.
We have been using heat pump water heaters that we build a duct system to. And so we pull the warmest air off the ceiling in a vaulted ceiling area or whatever, pull that 75-degree air through a heat pump, if you take out the efficiency charts, we're going to be somewhere between 500% and 600% efficient at that point. You don't need that heat on that ceiling anyway. There is no possible good thing that it's doing up there for you. So you might as well harvest it and put it into your water heater. It goes through the water heater heat pump. It comes out the other side 6 degrees cooler than what it went in. And so then it dumps back into the return of your furnace or your heating cooling system. And it comes back through, it does another filtration. So you're cleaning your air much better. And we can heat the hot water for $100 a year as compared to an electric hot water heater that runs $100 a month many times. We do a little bit of geothermal assist with a storage tank, which gets that preheated water up to 60, 80, 100 degrees, depends upon how much the heat pump is running. And I can run my hot water heater for $100 a year. And that's all electricity again.
Well, that's amazing. We have a couple more questions from the audience. One, I'm not sure folks here can answer. I might have some answers, but Colleen asks, with geothermal and other energy efficient designs, are there specific banks and lending agencies who are willing to invest in buildings like that? This person has a earthworks type of house, so most of it's banked into the earth with a green roof. Does anybody have any experience with that, with financing?
There are some lenders that do specialize. They know the background a little bit more with the renewables. There are sometimes price differences for appraisal purposes and things like that. And so there are lenders out there that do specialize in those types of loans. It's just a matter of searching. Ask your local lender. Sometimes they can direct you to that direction.
There is something very specific to Colorado. Some folks might know about CPACE, commercial property assessed clean energy loans, which is for commercial homes. That is for commercial buildings, but we have something in Colorado called Renew, just RENU, and that's sort of CPACE for homes. So that's something that something you might also check into. And it's all on the website if you just type in Renew. I put it in the chat. We have another question for Jacqueline. How quickly do you think we can transition to 100% renewable energy?
I think we can, because a lot of times we get questions about, can we do this by 2030? Is 2030, the Biden administration now has a goal of 2035. I think we can have pretty deep decarbonization in the power sector. That's just a matter of getting the solar and wind deployed with the batteries. That can get you most of the way. And then, as I mentioned earlier, getting that last bit on reliability. We could do that, but if we waited 2035 is what we analyzed in LA. And so I'm confident standing behind 2035. Doing that within the decade would be, it would take, that's more of that moonshot program where a lot of federal support and looking into how to keep that reliability. I mean, because we don't want any lights to go out because everybody's got their induction stoves, everyone has their heat pumps. Like, we don't want to lose power by any means. There's too much riding on it. And so the more research we can get on what's the best way of managing these extreme events, the better.
Wonderful. That's promising. Edwin, a question for you. Was it hard for you to transition to induction and you and your staff? or I guess you started out there, but most people start with a regular gas stove. So how was that transition?
Edwin, you'll need to unmute.
Thank you. Quite to the contrary, anyone who has worked with gas previously, you should see their expression. It's literally like they just got a brand new toy. It's like this is like everything we can imagine you want out of a gas stove. Now they have it. It's so much better, so much easier to work with, and more comfortable and cleaner. So yeah, it literally, when people start working with induction, you should see a big grin or amazement on their face.
That's great. Kahn, we have a couple of technical questions for you. David asks, could you speak to retrofitting a hot water heat system like baseboard hot water with geosource heat pumps, and that you need to heat that water to about 160 degrees Fahrenheit?
We don't do that efficiently. That's just one of the things that we can't really convert easily. We produce water, 410 refrigerant boils at 156 degrees. And so to produce anything higher than 130 to 140 degree temperature with the geothermal system, you're taxing it. You're running it right off the edge to the end of the world for that compressor, and they're not going to last long. And so we try not to do any of that stuff. It's been done. The Japanese have a compressor now that they have developed that will take refrigerant. They're using it in butcher houses, and they're cooling the meat, and they're taking the heat off that meat, and they're putting it into their hot water tanks to sanitize everything. And so, but it's a special, unique compressor, very expensive. It's not something that is readily available in today's market.
Thank you for that. I have the same problem, and I'm hoping technology might catch up if there's something we haven't thought of yet. A follow-on question, do you know any examples in Colorado of district ground coupled thermal networks? This is from Zach.
Depends upon how big your district is.
Could you explain that maybe for us?
Well, district means that you're utilizing heat from different buildings and utility type. You know, you have a system that a power plant produces a lot of hot water. Can you scrub that heat off of that hot water power plant and utilize it downstream? Sweden has been doing that for many years already. They have district hot water systems up and down the street. Instead of just a regular water line, they've got a hot water line. And everybody gets a geothermal heat pump, and you pull that heat off of whatever. And so you pay X amount of dollars for your BTUs per month. And that's how they're distributing it. We do the same thing basically in our apartment projects. We have a 24-plex, and very likely this time of the year, you will have somebody that is an air conditioning mode because the sun is shining in on the south side of the building. The north side of the building is still needing some more heating that day. And so all we're doing is swapping heat from one side of the building to another. We don't even have to run the ground loop. Our efficiencies become incredibly high that way. There's quite a few different scenarios to utilize districts, you know, if there's sources available.
Great. We have some comments about the systems in Sweden. It seems great. I did hear that at big buildings, IKEA has a geothermal system and they run most of the year in the cooling rather than heating half and cooling half. Is that because of the variable temperatures of the building and you pump the water different around like you just explained?
With the IKEA building, most commercial spaces, you have all the lights on. You have a body walking around. A body walking around will put off somewhere between 400 to 450 BTUs of heat, just walking and breathing and giving off body heat. So you need to take that load and you need to utilize, we do the same thing when we size for churches or movie theaters or anything like that, where you're going to have a concentration of a lot of people in a small space. You are almost always in the middle of the winter in air conditioning mode. And so that's why geothermal systems work so incredibly well for schools, because you got to turn the lights on. The little kids come in the morning, and as soon as the kids show up and the computers go on and the lights are on, air conditioning is basically running. At the same time, the gymnasium has nobody in it yet, or some of the other areas of the school, and so you transfer heat again, out of the classrooms to a central pumping station area, and it transfers the heat over to the gymnasium or to the cafeterias or to wherever that heat is needed, north side of the school where the sun's not shining yet. And so that's another version of the district heating kind of thing.
Very interesting. The next question, I'm wondering, Jacqueline, it's more of a policy question, and I'm wondering if this is something you considered. If somebody wants to convert their home to geothermal, it's really expensive. It's like 3 times more expensive, I guess, than if you did it in new development. Did you look at how you can, any policies and how you could promote this kind of efficient deployment of geothermal heating and cooling?
No, we didn't. No, the answer is we didn't look at the policy implementation questions. We certainly saw high value in electrifying end uses. So any kind of heat pump, geothermal or not, anything that helps remove natural gas. One of the, we've talked about some of the health and environmental benefits. One of the other benefits is that if you're electrifying a lot more end uses, that helps reduce the cost of a renewable energy transition, because now you're spreading over the, it's a big investment to replace all our generation with renewable, or, as much as it is fossil. So when we have more demand for electricity because of electrification, assuming that electricity demand comes at times that are manageable, right? So the more flexible that demand is, the more we can encourage it to come when the sun is shining. That makes it much cheaper to serve this new demand, and it helps spread the cost of the transition across others. So there's a lot of benefit. How you get there, it was not what we looked at, but we could at least say that from a cost benefit side, there's a lot of benefit potential.
Great, thanks.
I do have something to add to that.
Wonderful, thank you.
We do a lot of conversions. If your furnace is lasting or hanging onto its last leg, if your air conditioner needs replacement, you're going to spend the same amount of money to buy the best heating and cooling equipment that you can buy as what a geothermal system would cost you. The only difference then becomes what you have to do in the ground. And so at that point in time, if you take the energy credits that we have available from a lot of the utility companies now, and you take a lot of the tax incentives that are available to us from the government, right now it's 26%. You can write off 26% of the actual heating, cooling equipment, the air conditioner, furnace part of it. And you can write off 26% of the drilling costs. And so if you address your low hanging fruit in the house, which is your envelope, your load, if you address your load first, you need a lot less equipment going in. You need a lot less equipment costs for actual equipment costs and drilling costs. That's your best dollars spent by a long shot to convert to that full electrification.
As a follow-up, Edwin, you asked about what is a reasonable cost range for a conversion, like for a home, I guess. What would you expect?
Yeah, that question is directed towards Kahn.
Kahn, do you have an estimate for an average home? How much it would cost to convert?
You could have 1,000 square foot house with the same heat loss as a 6,000 square foot house. So what's the average? A 2-ton heat pump, a 2-ton size heat pump, which we heated 1,900 square feet per floor. So we heated over 3,900 square feet. We heated with a 2-ton heat pump. A 2-ton heat pump will cost you about $6,000 or $7,000. It cost one hole, basically. All we had to do was drill one hole to cover that load in our net zero energy homes. And so that hole cost $3,000 to drill. By the time you get done with the tax credits, you're probably into it less than $10,000. You go and you buy a 97 or 98% efficiency gas furnace, and you buy a 21 SEER air conditioner, you're going to still be less efficient with those pieces of equipment than our geothermal system, and you're going to be costing the same amount of money.
Great, that gives us a sense. David asks, maybe this is for Edwin, the induction expert. Do you know if there are signs that your gas burner is failing and it's a good time to switch out to induction?
Very good question. In terms of gas, because there are very few moving parts in the gas technology or platform, they rarely fail in the way that we think of the electronics. So in that sense, gas burners are very reliable that way compared to electronics, which I would say that inductions you would expect higher failure rates, and so that's something to take into consideration. But I think in the sum of the two benefits and pros and cons, I still believe strongly that induction is the way to go. Yeah, I would make the analogy that imagine us, transfer ourselves back 100 years ago, and someone asks the question, should I get a horse buggy or should I get a car? It's kind of like, to me, it's sort of that inflection point where the gas is definitely very reliable. Everyone knows how it works, but it's definitely the past. But looking forward, induction is where things are moving towards.
Thank you. That makes sense. I have a follow-up question. Have you been able to convince any fellow restaurateurs to make the switch?
I love that question because anyone specifically, I've not had that conversation. But when Guy Fieri of Diners, Drives, and Dives came in and featured us on one of his shows, when he walked into our kitchen, he had an assistant just taking copious notes. That when he came, he was pointing different things out to talk about. And as soon as he walks in the kitchen, he turns to his assistant and says, "What's up with the induction?" Because he knew that clearly is something that's very advanced in terms of what restaurants are doing. So he did ask me that question on his episode.
Oh, that's great. That's great. That's great. Well, it's coming. You're at what they know is called the bleeding edge, leading the crowd.
The bleeding edge or the leading edge?
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully leading.
Yeah.
We're past the bleeding part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is another question. Maybe is it true that some cities require gas for a certified commercial kitchen, and in California? They need exemptions to keep the gas. Oh, okay, to keep the gas. Well, that's two separate questions.
Yeah, I can't speak to the California requirements as I'm in Colorado. In Colorado, I'm not aware of any requirements to keep gas.
Okay, great. And so far, there's no cities that have said you cannot have gas, but
I have not heard of that.
yeah, that may be to come. Well, we've had a really great discussion. I appreciate all our speakers. I appreciate the audience. It was really great conversation today. And I really appreciate that everybody's interest in building electrification and moving towards electrified buildings. It's coming to the future. It's going to be a long, slow transition, but clearly if we can get folks to build all electric, we're ahead of the game, and then we'll see about converting. That's a big job. I also want to thank all 2 E2 members listening and everybody else listening on this call. Our little organization is an effective way of influencing policy because of everybody's dedication and passion. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation so much that you'll consider learning more about all 3 organizations, E2, Good Business Colorado, and the Sierra Club at their websites. And with that, I would like to say goodbye and hope everybody has a good rest of your day. And thank you again. Take care, everybody.